Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me to speak here today and one of these first opening event of a very exciting project. And congratulations for getting this expansion of this institute, which I think will bring a very new and complementary aspect on these coastal tropical areas. So I thought that I want to present, rather than a global overview, just to dive into one example, actually how we can learn from Earth system models, from global models, how we can learn something on regional aspects and what is maybe also missing in these global models. So how I think we should probably expand those models in order to capture more local, more downscale and regional processes. So I picked the example of tropical cyclones, and particularly interactions between the ocean and the biosphere in the ocean and the atmosphere. So I also want to thank several collaborators, in particular the PhD students and postdocs, Arjun, David, and Mikael, who have actually done most of the analysis that I'm presenting today. So tropical cyclones are, I would say, one of the most fascinating features in the Earth's climate because they are kind of a local visible structure that you can see from space, like in this image here, but they are also a highly turbulent dynamic regime, and therefore they are also really difficult to understand. And last but not least, they interact with many different aspects of the Earth system, so that makes them also interesting for many different disciplines. However, they are also a severe threat for populations, in particular in tropical coastal areas. So therefore, it's not just pure scientific interest that drives us to better understand these phenomena, but it has like a real application that we would actually really like to better understand and better forecast these tropical storms. So how I want to discuss these storms today is in the context of a global model, and this global model I would call already as an Earth system model because it has actually many ingredients of what the Earth system actually makes, what makes it so characteristic. So probably most important for tropical cyclones is the atmosphere. So as Björn Stevens already introduced, so we have a very high resolution atmosphere component running at the Max Planck Institute, but that alone would of course not make an Earth system model, but we also have it coupled to an ocean model. And here you see a couple of eddies that also Jan talked already about. And it's not only the ocean that we have, but we also have biochemistry part in the ocean. So because we also think that biochemistry has many interactions with the climate system and feedbacks that are also relevant to capture. So they are of course important for regional scales and also for local stakeholders, but they are also important for the global climate. And last but not least, we also have a land component in our model that actually allows to simulate also the vegetation and the carbon fluxes over land. So just to give you an impression about how the circulation in such a model looks like, so this is an animation that I'm showing here, and if you look closely, you can see already the main actors of today's talk, like here a couple of tropical cyclones that develop naturally in these type of models and that we can study within a global framework here. So one important aspect that I want to highlight is the interaction between different components, and the first obvious component is the interaction of tropical cyclones with the ocean. And so in this study we were asking actually how might the ocean variability, and particularly manifested by the mesoscale eddy field, how might this actually impact tropical cyclone intensity? So here on the lower left we see a tropical cyclone sitting at the snapshot here in the middle of its trajectory. So these are all points of this tropical cyclone. And this tropical cyclone is actually passing over a warm core anomaly. So that is what you can see here. That is the upper ocean heat content. before the tropical cyclone passed over it. Here you also see again the trajectory, and you can see this tropical cyclone is directly passing over this warm core, what we call an eddy, this warm core feature. And what tropical cyclones do when they move across the ocean, they do a lot of mixing. So they take out heat from the ocean, and that's one of the fuels for the tropical cyclones, but they also mix the ocean. And as you might know, that the upper ocean is relatively warm, but below it's getting colder. And when you mix these deeper water masses upwards, then you decrease the temperature. And that is what we can see actually here, while the tropical cyclone is passing over the ocean. You can see already here the start of some cold anomaly, but here it's becoming very obvious actually. And that is the so-called cold wake. Because the tropical cyclone mixes cold water from below, it's decreasing the sea surface temperature. And so this effect then reduces the potential of tropical cyclones to further increase in speed, for instance, and in energy, because it's kind of destroying its own energy reservoir. However, this tropical cyclone now not only is doing the mixing, but it's also now hitting this warm core feature, this warm ocean eddy. And so suddenly when this tropical cyclone is sitting here over this eddy, you see that there is not so much cooling anymore involved. And we were wondering, what does this actually mean for this tropical cyclone intensity? And as you can see here now, we divided this in 3 parts. So 2 parts are associated with this cold wake, this mixing upwards of cold water masses. So in this period, actually, the tropical cyclone is losing intensity. That is here measured as the maximum wind speed, and this is the time of the development of the cyclone. So cyclone intensity is decreasing. However, once it hits this warm feature, tropical cyclone intensity is going up again. And this might not look a lot on this scale here. However, it was one category of strength for the tropical cyclone. And you might imagine that this increase of strength of one category is actually quite a severe amount if you think about the damages that this tropical cyclone can do for the coastal areas. So then we were thinking about, what is this now? This was a case study, one single example. Is there any net effect? Is there any systematic effect of these ocean eddies? And first of all, we were not sure actually how often does the tropical cyclone hit an eddy, or was this just a coincidence of this example? But then we looked in, I think it was a 2-year simulation of a coupled model with this high resolution, 5 kilometer in the ocean and 10 in the atmosphere. And what we saw is actually that probably all of the tropical cyclones are hitting ocean eddies. Of course, not all are warm core eddies. There are also cold core eddies in the ocean. And so you might see that there are some eddies have an intensifying effect on the tropical cyclones, and others have the other opposite effect, that they decrease the tropical cyclone intensity. And here in the spaghetti plot, you can see actually all the tropical cyclones that are out there, and they are marked with these reddish and bluish dots when they hit a warm eddy or when they hit a cold eddy. So, and then we're looking at how actually is the systematic effect of these eddies on the tropical cyclone. And the most severe effect was actually observed for tropical cyclone tracks that hit more cold eddies than warm eddies, because there's this blue line here, which is showing the intensity relative to the maximum intensity. So we rescaled all tropical cyclones in this time frame. And what we can see here is that the cold track tropical cyclones, that they actually have a reduced intensity compared to the rest. When we look only at the cases where the eddies hit, where the tropical cyclone hits a warm core eddy, then the signal is not as strong, because there's a minor signal, but it was not as strong as for the cold features. But in any case, it shows that having just one component in the Earth system model will probably lead to wrong forecasts and to wrong dynamics of these tropical cyclones. So therefore, I think in this example, it nicely illustrates that we need at least these two components. However, we were also looking at the interaction with the biogeochemistry. So because this tropical cyclone is doing a lot of mixing, as I said already, the question is, what does it do then now with the, for instance, with the CO2 flux? Because that is also, of course, a very prominent quantity that we want to study in Earth system models. It also involves many feedbacks. So here, this is another simulation where we have a coupled biogeochemistry model. And here you see two other cyclone tracks. I will only focus on the left one here. And here you can see actually the air CO2 flux. So red means that the ocean is outgassing, what it typically does during that time of the year in the North Atlantic, and blue means that there is CO2 uptake. So as what you can see here when we go into the close-up, that just below the tropical cyclone, there's actually an enhanced outgassing of CO2. And that is kind of probably straightforward to understand if you think of that the ocean, that the tropical cyclone with its intense wind speed, that is actually also enhancing the mixing and the extraction of not only temperature, but also in this case of CO2. However, in the lee of this tropical cyclone, in the wake of the tropical cyclone, there you can actually see that the opposite effect is taking place, and suddenly the ocean starts taking up CO2. And the reason for that is what we have already met on the last example, is that actually that the ocean is cooling the surface. So we have here now this cold anomaly in this cold wake, as I have shown it in the last example, and this cold water can actually capture more CO2. So now the ocean is actually able to take up more CO2, and therefore the ocean CO2 uptake is increased in this area. So here, this example nicely illustrates that there are also actually interactions with the biochemistry, and that there are even further examples, like what we also saw in the study, that the phytoplankton growth is actually enhanced. And the question is, what net or what global effect actually this might have on the climate system. So that is something that we are following up now. So just to conclude this part roughly is that, so storm and eddy resolving coupled models, as I've shown here, they are able actually to not only capture the dynamics of eddies and tropical cyclones, for instance, itself, but they are also able to have interactions and feedbacks between these dynamics. And I think this is very interesting because now we can combine these two effects and study them in a much more realistic way as we could before, when we just had either the one component or the other component. And of course, this high resolution is important to resolve these features, otherwise we wouldn't see them. And the CMIP type of simulations, you typically do not see these features at all. And the global aspect is also important because these tropical cyclones, of course, they grow on a global background state that is rather large scale. So, and also this needs to be represented correctly in this model in order to get the proper tropical cyclones. So these coupled high-resolution Earth system models, they allow for better representation of these features, but of course not only of these features, of many more. And that brings me to my last slide, a bit where I want to go a bit more broader to the challenge of these models that we have now, and how we can, or what we have to do actually to make them more applicable, also with a view, of course, on coastal tropical systems. So, and one aspect that is also a fascinating aspect for my own research is turbulence. So here you can see a coral reef, and in the upper part of the ocean you see that there are some waves. Of course, turbulence is very difficult to visualize, but you can imagine that these waves, of course, that they will also do mixing in the water column, and to really appropriately capture this turbulence, that is actually really difficult, and because it's happening on very small scales, and this type of turbulence we will need to parameterize also in future models. So, and there it's key to actually to come up with good ideas, maybe guided with machine learning, maybe guided with new physical constraints and ideas to improve this turbulence. And Surface waves is also an important aspect. So, of course, we have this model, we have a free surface, but these are not really the waves that you see when you look out of the window on a ship, because the resolution that we have are kind of kilometer scale resolution. And of course, you know that the waves outside of your ship, they are not kilometer scale. So, but they're in particularly designed statistical wave models out there, spectral models that capture the statistic effect of these surface waves. And I think this is also important to have, and particularly also to look at coastal dynamics. Of course, biology is an impact, or is important to kind of represent, because it's so important to know actually how the climate system will affect these biological species there, and how this then will affect probably the humans that live from these biological features. And biology is not only in the ocean, of course, it's also above the water, so both aspects are probably important. Also, pollution is an issue, and with new approaches, with new computational approaches, we are able to actually trace pollution throughout the ocean, and that is something that is probably also something that is relevant to actually see where and how pollution actually propagates through the coastal areas and where it maybe ends up. But probably the way of the pollution is probably the most dangerous one, and to better understand this is probably also something that would be key to have in such models. And last but not least, the socio-economic aspect, I would say, is really important, because we humans, we always interact with feedbacks to the Earth system, and I think that these feedbacks are also interesting to study. And who knows, maybe there are some ideas around that we can at least incorporate some of these feedbacks into this Earth system model itself, or at least try to better understand the interactions between these compartments. So lastly, all these figures are actually from the ZMT. So I think that that nicely illustrates that these challenges are actually in the heart of your institute, and that is those features are actually, and those processes are actually will shape a very interesting set of research questions for the future. So now I'm at the end, and I thank you very much for your attention.